Kinner. You did great from a distance. You're muted.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob. I was kind of wondering how it went.
Yeah, when it was pretty good, actually. They could hear you better than they can hear me.
Chairman Nicholas, members of the committee, you are live on YouTube.
Okay, roll call, please.
Representative Kinner.
Here.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Schwartz. Here. Representative Simpson.
Here.
Representative Stith.
Here.
Representative Walters.
Here.
And Chairman is here.
Here. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, first we're going to do a re-referral on 254. Go ahead, Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have before you House Bill 254. This bill is based on the discussion we had here, let's say a week ago, actually, on the transportation computer system. After that discussion and trying to figure out how to handle House Bill 24, a decision was made to just really run a separate bill on that, and this is that bill. So I'll just walk through it. It's a long bill, but a lot of it has to do with the way we write legislation where we include the entire paragraph. So I'll just run through the highlights. First, on page 1 on over to page 2 is the creation of a transportation information system account into which the monies will be deposited, and they are continually appropriated to the Department of Transportation, only to be expended to replace the revenue information system as it existed on July 1 of last year. Had to pick a place at which to specify what it looked like. They have to report to the Joint Transportation Highways Military Affairs Interim Committee on the status of that. And they are authorized to accept gifts, contributions, donations, grants, federal funds, etc. for that system. Section 2 goes into some modifications to existing language, and what all of that does, pretty much the rest of the bill, as you get over all the way over to page actually page 10. So from 3 to 10 talks about adding a $5 fee to every driver's license and to every vehicle registration to help pay for the computer system. And again, as we the way we write legislation requires that we indicate the entire paragraph. So that's why you have several pages listing out a variety of charges and costs to registration fees. Page 10 goes to section 3. A is probably the most important section in the bill. Says that not later than July 1st, 2026, the Department of Transportation shall replace the revenue information computer system that was in use on July 1st, 2020. Department shall use funds from any appropriated source to fund the replacement of the computer system under this section. They shall apply for any funds that might become available from the federal government, including any COVID funds that may be used to replace the system, and they can backfill using those funds if they take funds out of other monies. B indicates that they shall determine by rule and regulation fees for third-party use of the revenue information system, and that half of those fees go to replacing the computer system. Currently, there are third parties who use that system, such as insurance companies who want driver's records. There are some companies that sell their information on television. They have one of them being a company that has a cartoon fox as their logo. Currently, I think they charge about $5 for that access. And frankly, that doesn't even pay for it. So the department can set by rule and reg, which is a little bit of a change. We don't, the legislature doesn't have to set it. Those fees and half of them go to funding the computer system. And that they.
So is there a way to assess how to determine how they're going to determine that fee? To me, it should be predicated on the value of the information and do a cost analysis of what we're providing. And then maybe make it a monthly fee or something. So it's just, I mean, something that has some bite to it.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree. I wasn't sure what that fee should be. I have an idea that it should be considerably more than $5. At one point, the department suggested 10. I feel it needs to be substantially more than 10.
What about 1,000? What about 10,000?
Yeah. And that's on a per transaction basis
Oh,
for
okay.
each request.
Per
I would
well,
think.
Yeah, but that one transaction is running the entire computer system, right?
Mr.
So it's
Chairman,
accessing 150,000 driver's license data.
Mr. Chairman, I agree. I think the fee should be probably closer to at least $25 per check for driver's license, and probably even more if a company wants to use it for a personal gain, which would be to sell information on the internet.
Yeah.
That would be my, but I had nothing to go on for those. And if the committee wishes to set a particular fee, I think that's a reasonable minimum. And lastly, it's a report by September of each year to this committee and to the Joint Transportation Committee. That's the bill in a nutshell, Mr. Chairman. Be glad to answer questions, other than the last one I couldn't answer.
So just to refresh, you had a bill here before, you kind of modified it, brought it back, ran it through your committee, and now this is back to us on referral.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I am getting a lot of echo from these things.
Yeah, so you had a bill here last week.
Correct?
That one went back. This is the new bill that you brought up in your committee, and now it's re-referred back to us.
Mr. Chairman, actually, it should have been directly referred to this committee.
That's what I thought. So we could actually work the bill.
Yes, you can, Mr. Chairman. It is assigned to this committee, has never been addressed by another committee. You may do anything you wish to the bill.
Okay. Is there,
Question?
go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 10, that line 3, not later than July 1st, 2026, department shall replace the system. Does that mean by replaced by that date, are you indicating it will be up and functioning by that date, or that is the date that construction on the system must commence? Which side of the equation are we talking on that date?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, it would be my intention under that the system is completely replaced, functional, and up and running. Mr. Chairman, if I may, we've kicked this can too far down the road. Frankly, if it needs to replace that bad, it needs replaced now.
Do they have an estimate on how long it will take to have the system put in place? In other words, they have to go out to bid, come in, review the bids, and then is it a off-the-shelf revised system, or is it a brand new system?
Mr. Chairman, it is my understanding that they're looking at going out for RFPs right now. The bill would give them the basis to do that, because then they know they have a mandate and a source of funding for it. And they're looking at an off-the-shelf fix, not a custom-built system, which should be fairly readily available.
And then to follow up then, so we had rough calculations of how much this was going to raise per year. What were those numbers?
Mr. Chairman, those numbers vary. The Barry Dunn report that was done at the request of this committee said, I believe the number was 36.7 million.
Yeah, I'm for the system. I'm saying how much this is going to raise per year.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question, Mr. Chairman. Approximately the $5 addition driver's license and that would raise approximately somewhere near 7 million a year, potentially 8. Mr. Chairman, I have no estimate on what the additional fees would raise.
And so part of our discussion prior to this bill being reconstituted was whether or not we make those fees time limited, or if we keep those dollars and then have those go to our general fund obligation or back to YDOT for roads or however we pick, but we don't have to make that decision right now.
Mr. Chairman, we don't. If you notice, I removed any sunset dates from this with a couple considerations. One being that it could go to their general operating expense, one that they could go, well, several general fund. Currently, as the bill is written, any monies generated would have to go to this account, and it's continually appropriated for the system. And Mr. Chairman, I think if it stays there for a while and say 10, 15 years, they're probably going to have to replace the system again. Technology is changing that fast, and I don't want to get into the situation we're currently in with a system that is close to 40 years old that we can't maintain anymore.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Burkhart, I've got a couple of concerns. One is I really struggle with this 5-year timeframe that is, it just seems to me that we get this system in place in 5 years, it's antiquated.
Mr. Chairman, potentially yes, at the rate we're going. I would like a much shorter time frame. I know that the department would like a much longer time frame.
Well, Mr. Chairman, which leads me to the second question is, and frankly, Mr. Chairman, I don't know who the question is to here, is that the last year when we visited about the RIS system, and we put the brakes on and said, we need to look and see if the amount that is estimated is a valid amount, the process, why can't this be done? And so we're trying to make that approach, but this bill, if I read it correctly, we generate revenue and then we're giving the department the go ahead to move forward. And is that right, Chairman Burkhart?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, in effect, it is. I would look at it as a mandate to fix the system and a requirement from the legislature to get that done and completely accomplished in 5 years.
And so, Mr. Chairman, it almost seems like we're giving the YDOT a waiver around what we've asked the rest of the agencies to do to circumvent this process that we're trying to establish. And am I the only one that's, and I'm in the dark plenty, but
And
I don't know.
Yeah, just to follow up with that, the question is, we're kind of establishing a protocol that from the beginning, YDOT or whatever as agency it is, works with ETS, goes out and does a cost analysis and a systems analysis to make sure they're getting the right thing for the right price, and have that independently reviewed when we're going to go to spend $35 to $60 million. That type of thoroughness needs to take place, and then come back and report, because we're saying they need to report to ETS and to us from the beginning, and when those dollars when they start to develop their systems analysis and what they're going to get. So the question is, do we incorporate that type of language into this bill? So that we know that we're getting the biggest bang for our buck. I mean, that's the whole concept of it. And I think that ETS has had some type of an analysis on it in the past, but you have to remind us of where we're at with it.
Mr. Chairman, on that regard, this committee had I would call it the Barry Dunn study done that says it should be somewhere 36.7 million in there. I could have the 6 and 7 mixed. ETS has done a study that says it's 7 million, and the fiscal note on the original House Bill 24 said 80 million. I'm not sure anyone really knows the cost. I find 80 million to be way out of line. I find the 70 million personally to be out of line. When the NCAR facility west of here is going to replace their supercomputer with a new one for 35 million.
So the question is to develop an RFP that asks for the right things under the right language to make sure that we get the broadest spectrum of offers, and that we know that we're asking for things that are not frivolous, overexpensive, workable with other systems, all that kind of stuff. We're not computer experts. Someone needs to be a computer expert who puts that together and not bias. And so that's ETF, and then some other consultant in order to develop it. I think that's kind of what we're leaning towards. And maybe, I'm sure that maybe YDOT's already contemplated all that, but we just want to get our comfort zone about it. So,
Well, Mr. Chairman, I don't know that looking for guidance here from you. I don't know if that's something we can do here if we just do a due pass and then try to do something like that on the, I don't know how to do that, but it does seem, I'm not opposed to the fee to pay for the system. I think that that's a reasonable approach, but I guess personally don't like the bill also authorizes them to move forward somewhat unrestricted to get it taken care of, but I don't know how we.
go ahead.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I understand that approach, and I have not been privy to all the discussions that this committee has had over the system. I guess some of it deals with my frustration. This keeps coming back year after year, and we don't move forward in some manner. I would think that as this bill is coming to the Appropriations Committee directly, you could make any amendments you wish to it beyond what you normally do on a re-referral, because you're in effect, the first committee to review it. And if you wish Mr. Chairman, if you wish a study or something like that, I think that's well within the scope.
So I think that what we would like is to have the department come and tell us what they respond to our questions that we just asked. So we can craft language and put it in the bill, because it'd be a lot easier to do it here than it will be on the floor. And we got a day or two to do it. So I think that would be the committee's preference. Is that fair?
Mr. Chairman, this is Ryan. I don't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to notify you that you do have 2 representatives from the Department of Transportation available for questions from the committee in the waiting room.
Okay, are you ready? Can we throw them on? Okay, bring them on in, Ryan. They can kind of address
Mr. Chairman.
And what I'm thinking is they can tell us what they're doing, how they're doing it. And then if we want draft language, we can ask them to draft it for us or give us a rough draft.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Stiff.
I do have a question for the Representative Burkhardt with respect to page 10, lines 8 through 16, how this new fee coordinates with CARES Act funding. So last year, under the first CARES Act, this agency received approximately $72 million. And the federal government is poised to distribute substantially similar funds potentially this year. So this bill seems to provide authorization for them, if it's eligible, to use that for the revenue information system. If so, does the fee stay in place? If they're able to get $15 or $20 million of CARES Act 2 money, does the fee stay in place? Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, yes. What it does, it says that they shall apply for any of those funds that may become available. Whether they get them or not is a completely another matter. Excuse me. And that those funds can be used to replace other funds they may use out of wherever. In talking to the agency, they said, please don't specify where to get the funds, just tell us to get them, which is what this bill does. So they could take it out of FMRs, out of highway funds, out of administrative funds, wherever in that, and then use other monies such as COVID money to backfill.
Okay, who do we have online? Who wants to go first?
Mr. Chairman, Taylor Rossetti, Support Services Administrator for WYDOT. Director Reiner was pulled into another meeting, so he regrets not being here. Would you like me to just try to take a stab at the questions as I've heard them, or did you want to repeat the questions? How do you prefer to move forward, Mr. Chairman?
Take a stab.
Okay. Starting with how to establish what the fees are with third parties. I mean, through the rulemaking process, obviously what you do is go out and see. I can give you an idea, and as you mentioned, running that request one time does provide access to multiple records. So you guys are spot on there. I think that is a very good point. I can give you an idea that some of these entities, get somewhat detailed information on a very regular basis. and some of them will only pull the information once a year. So to your point, depending on what they're pulling, the fees can vary. And some of those fees can be as high as $1,750 a week. And then some folks only pay, $1,750 a year. So there is a threshold there for finding some of the value in how much that information is worth. And through the process to make rules, that's really what we would establish. Right now, we have some vendors that spend, $90,000 a year to get this information, and other people only pull it one time. So there is some room there. Also, to Chairman Burkhart's response about $5 per record on the driving records, that is correct. But that's a different source of information for a different purpose. But we would also explore what the threshold is there for, what a market can bear, because if you're going to use a third party to provide that information to you, they have to pass that cost on to you. So whatever we charge them is going to get passed on to you as a third party. So there has to be some threshold there. That is the fee, as Chairman Burkhart mentioned, that for just pulling a driving record for if you had a trucking company, between $5 and $10 a record does seem reasonable. And there may even be an ability to go slightly higher than that. So that kind of gives you an overview of where those fees are at right now. All told, between the title and registration information that can be shared under the Privacy Act, as well as the driving records, the department generates about between $1 million and $1.3 million, $1.4 million, depending on the year. And that would be that money that would go into this. Half of that money would be what would go into this account. So there is a substantial amount of money being generated there, but we do believe, to your guys' point, there is the ability to push those fees a little further.
Okay, next question.
Regarding the cost estimates, as we've talked about this process, what we tried to give the committee as we've been working through this was really kind of a 10-year cost of ownership. So that did include the original, building replacement of the system, as well as kind of what the maintenance and ongoing costs for that system would be over the course of the 10 years. What we have done as part of this, and why that number has changed, is that really until you go out to RFP, all you can do is your cost estimates. What we have done is updated those figures based on the current market that is out there. You guys are aware we are using our third-party consultant to do some of that analysis. And they are telling us that cost is closer to 80 million now. But again, that's replacement of the system and ongoing maintenance costs for that 10-year window. So that's closer to that 80 million, which is what you see in the original fiscal note for the bill. Regarding implementation of the system and how long it's going to take.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Rossetti, could I interrupt you briefly?
Absolutely, sir, Mr. Chair.
So on that 10-year cost, are you estimating, say, 5 million a year? At 10 years, that's 50 million that way. But I think you're only spending $1.5 million or something currently maintaining your system. And so 2 questions. One, what is that ongoing cost versus the initial construction cost? There ought to be a breakout to where we would know those. And then the second side of it is, what is your plan to pay that ongoing cost if it's above and beyond what your existing system is costing you today?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman and Representative Walters. Yes, there was a little bit more of a detailed cost originally as far as system implementation up front. And these numbers have changed a little bit, but I go back to the report that we provided for 2018. And really the system implementation, which is really kind of the preparation, hardware, software, and implementation through that phase, was estimated at that time to be about 42.6 million, and then additional years of maintenance. Right now, the way that we had presented this to you was an equal bill every single year. So a vendor would potentially take additional risk up front to spread those costs over time. With this bill, and knowing that there's a dedicated funding stream in place, There would be the ability, as Chairman Burkhart mentioned, to go the other route and really just pay those costs you're mentioning, Representative Walters, and do it more of a by the implementation. So you're going to have a higher upfront cost and lower costs over time. But until you go out and actually implement this system and do the RFP, those costs are a little bit variable. But right now, based on the market data and looking at how other states have done this, that 10-year run out is still about $80 million. You can either pay more upfront or annualize it at $8 million every year. To your second question, the estimated annual maintenance going forward, our estimate on that is that it will likely go from about 1.4 million a year to about $2.4 million a year. So that extra million, we would have to figure out internally, but the thought there is with the ability to adjust some of those third-party fees, we would work to recapture that money that we're spending on our existing maintenance, and then utilize some of that additional money we could generate through the increased fees to the third parties to keep that maintenance ongoing. I hope that answers your question, Mr. Chairman and Representative Walters.
So, Mr. Rossetti, this is Representative Larson, and so I understand our current system, the one that's old like me, that you have a maintenance fee and stuff on. So now we're going to have somebody build us a new system, which is our system. So do we not have people capable of maintaining that system for $1.4 million a year? Why don't we do it ourselves?
Go ahead, Troy. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I think that's probably in Mr. Babbitt's wheelhouse.
I figured maybe it might be too.
Mr. Chairman, Committee, Troy Babbitt, I'm the Chief Technology Officer at YDOT. That's a very complex question. That is an old, antiquated, written in COBOL. COBOL programmers are few and far between anymore. We do have a large contract that ends, I believe, in 23-24 for expertise in that. And we're not looking at customizing or building a system ourselves. We are looking at a COTS solution, a commercial off-the-shelf system, so that we don't run into this into the future. One of the reasons I'll add on there to what Mr. Rossetti also said, one of the additional costs, as we've had conversations now with 18 of the counties, and we will have to create interfaces from the state system to these county systems, and that was a part of the cost that started to increase a little bit. The complexities of this system are tremendous.
But Troy, if I may, 1.4, I don't understand it. I know you're the smart guy, but really for $1 million a year, we can't maintain that.
Mr. Chairman, we've had an awful lot of conversion and consolidation with ETS. We have lost programmers as we go forward. This is a brand new arena as we move forward. Our full intent would be to customize, get this data upgraded and customized so that we could drop it into a system that it is clean data for whatever system comes within 5 years. We don't anticipate that actually going away, at least from a technology position. I know technology changes very quickly. Back to your question, I would say no. I know that's a huge amount, but it's older technology, and you just don't have the individuals that know how to write that code.
We're building a whole new system. We're getting a brand new system. We're not talking about that old antiquated. We're going to abort that thing, get rid of it. And so we're getting this whole new system, right, that this bill address, and we can't once we get that in place, we can't maintain it for $1 million a year.
Mr. Chairman, that is, and Representative Larson, that is typically how these contracts, you're purchasing that commercial off-the-shelf product with a vendor for cloud services that keep the data. They're responsible for all of that, updates moving forward. It eliminates all of the capability of us having to customize and code it and hire programmers, which which would be even a huger increase in cost, I would imagine, than the 1.5 million per year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to reverse engineer this same question and just offer that at $80 million over 10 years, that's $8 million a year, you could hire 10 people to learn Cobalt and work on the Cobalt system and pay each of those 10 a wage of $800,000 a year. So I think there'd be quite a few people that would love a programming job at $800,000 a year and continue the existing system. So I think the point is that the cost of this system just doesn't mathematically make any sense to the group of us sitting here. And so we're trying to wrap our head around how we should proceed with a system that could be addressed in a different way, just due to that high cost. And so I think that's what Representative Larson's trying to get to, that we could pay multiple people a few hundred thousand, we could pay 5 people or 6 people $150,000 a year to maintain this system for us. Or the new system, and I'm referring to the new system. And so it's just the cost of all of it that is not lining up in our minds. And that's what we're trying to drill down to and get to the bottom of.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Walters and Larson also, through the entire process, we've been working with ETS, trying to figure out what the best direction is to move forward. And one of the things that we've all come to the realization of is that as fast as technology is changing, to all the points that have been made, the best option to move forward with this is a commercial off-the-shelf product that can be slightly modified to use in our current environment. What that does is it puts it over to where you're buying their product, and part of the cost of going forward is for them to maintain it. One of the things that this does is hopefully it doesn't get to the catastrophic, well, it's not even catastrophic, but the large lift that we're talking about here, right? The problem we've got with our current system is that it was self-built. We then have had to hire people along the way to build it and maintain it. We're trying to avoid getting into that same problem later on by going with this commercial off the shelf. This is very similar to, say, the subscription services that you guys may have on your computer for your word processing and spreadsheet products that you're now paying on a monthly basis. You don't actually own that. You're not actually changing the coding of that. That company then, with your subscription fees, is going and updating that system along the way as you change. Every year as we come through the session and work with you guys, every law that's passed has to get changed and recoded in this system. Part of that ongoing maintenance going forward is them keeping that up to date. So it is trying to get that big lift done, to your point, Representative Walters, but then having them maintain this and not having that burden fall upon us. Talking about bringing in the resources program in COBOL, the ongoing rate for somebody who knows nothing about this system and programs for COBOL is about half of what that salary would be right now anyway. So that's literally what those guys are billing out for anyway. That doesn't even take into account that they would basically be having to learn the business processes here and being hostage working on our system alone. So that is something that we have looked at. We've talked about, tried to bring in COBOL programmers and do this system. But the best path forward is we've worked with ETS and looking in the market and seeing what other states are doing, is getting out of the business of programming these big enterprise systems and going to these commercial off-the-shelf products. That cost estimate that we give to you today is basically a fourth quarter estimate from 2020, based on the environment that's out there right now to be updating DMV systems across the country. So that's the cost that we're bringing to you and we're talking about here is based off a market survey about what's going on in this space right now across the country.
So, Mr. Rossetti, we just really love you guys. We really do. But I'm telling you, we have just struggled a little bit with these numbers. And I guess maybe I equate it to when I brought this King Ranch home and told my wife it's just the pickup I had to have. You know, it was just the one. There was nothing else that would work. The leather seats, the butt warmers, everything in it was just, I just had to have them. And she kept asking why, and so I kind of feel like I'm not asking the right questions. So you brought us a recommendation for a system that you feel is adequate and appropriate. We're not seeing that. And I guess I'm wondering, have you looked at something else that, why does it have to be? I just don't know the right questions to ask. I think that the time, 5 years is excessive. It's going to be antiquated by the time it's in place, but yet you're telling me it's off the shelf. Well, it's off the shelf. Why in the hell does it take 5 years? And then we talk about, and I apologize. I don't get it. Then we talk about, it's going to take 5 years, and then we've got, in 10 years, it's going to be antiquated, and we have to start it all over again. So we've actually only, we've got it for 5 years, and then we're going to go through another $50 million. It just seems like it just feels like we're trying to drive a square peg into a round hole to me. And, granted, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but if you can help me get my head around this a little better and feel comfortable, because I sure don't now. I do like the idea of the fees to pay for it, though, by the way.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Larson, you can be much harder on me if you need to be. I will not be offended. We're good here. There's no issue with that. What I can tell you is we are working on the requirements of the system. And what we're talking about is what is the basic functionality that you need in order to implement the driver's license and the motor vehicle laws of the state of Wyoming. That's really what we're trying to build. Then you're going in here and you're trying to figure out what are the capabilities that you're going to need for the future. That's where your customer facing side of this is, right? We've talked about online support. We've talked about being able to do some of your transactions in that realm. So that's part of what you're putting together here. That process is being done with subject matter experts. So they're saying, here's the process we use now. I go from A to B to C to D. And then you're saying, okay, so that's what we're looking for. Then once you're developing those requirements, that's being vetted by us and ETS to make sure that we're not trying to build the Cadillac, as you mentioned, or I guess I shouldn't use the proper name, but the fancy seat warmers, right? We're just trying to build the seats, not worrying about necessarily the bells and whistles. So that's the process. Mr. Babbitt also did mention one of the other difficulties in estimating this cost, right? Our system here in Wyoming is that those fees and a good amount of those transactions are done at the county level. And those counties have systems that are very good at doing it, but that information has to get passed on to us. And due to the nature of doing RFPs, we haven't been able to have any detailed discussions with their vendors because their vendors could potentially bid on this RFP. So that is an unknown cost that is out there. But that cost is something that we have anticipated as part of our $80 million. So Representative Larson and Mr. Chairman, I know that's not getting to all of your question, but what I can tell you is going back to the report that was submitted to Joint Appropriations in 2018, our process has remained the same, and we have continued to work with ETS every step of the way as we move through this process. And the process that we've identified is this commercial off-the-shelf product. If we haven't identified the product, we've identified that is the methodology we want. We want a system who's been implemented in another jurisdiction successfully. We don't want to take a gamble here. We want this to be a vendor who is proven successful. And the cost that we've given you here today is, again, based on a market assessment of what's going on in that space right now. The state to the south of us did a project similar to this. The 14-year cost outlay on that was about $120 million. So that gives you kind of an idea of what we have seen just in our immediate area.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
question for Mr. Rossetti. You may not have an understanding, but do you have any guess or understanding of to what extent your agency might be able to take advantage of the CARES Act 2 money that was just approved by the United States Senate just a few days ago?
CARES Act 3.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, we haven't seen the actual language in the bill and whether or not that funding would be available. What I can tell you about the previous allocations of dollars, most of that money was very specific, and a large part of the early money that came was specific for FAA, so the Federal Aviation Administration, as well as the FTA, which is the Federal Transit Administration. So those funds were not eligible for a project like this. And then the second amount of money that folks have been heard about is money that was allocated directly for federal highway spending. So right now, the monies that have come to us directly through the CARES Act have not lent themselves to being eligible for this project. And we will continue to monitor what comes out of Congress in this next round of funding.
So what we need to do is move along on this thing and kind of get it moving. Is there any other public comment? Ryan?
Mr. Chairman, there's nobody else with their hand raised, so I don't believe so.
Okay, I've got a couple suggestions, but so what I want to do is, any other questions for Chairman Burkhart? And then I'm going to take the reins.
Good.
Okay, go ahead.
I apologize. Thank you. One of the reasons for the 5 years and the fees on driver's license and vehicles is at $8 million a year, potentially, 5 years is $40 million. And personally, I feel they should be able to do this for $40 million. I know companies that are running multiple operations around the world on a computer system that cost them $50,000. I hear all the comments on we have to do this and that. And I've been involved with computer systems with multiple inputs from literally around the world that were done for, in today's money, probably about 20 million. So that was part of the reason for the 5-year limit with that money is $40 million ought to be a good start to progress. And that was my thought, plus the additional money from fees and that. In committee, some of the original testimony is that the current amount of money being allocated to maintenance would be enough to maintain a new system also. So that was just my logic. I just wanted to explain that to the committee, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other public comment? I seeing none. We will close public comment. Is there a motion on the bill?
Move the bill.
Moved by Representative Walters, second by Representative Larson. So here's what I'm going to recommend that we do. First of all, just in case it doesn't happen in 2026, I would move that we change that to 2027. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? That motion carries. That's a motion. All right. Then on page 10, put a period after, on the line 9, put a period after available, and then strike the remaining paragraph 10 through 16. And ladies and gentlemen, we don't want to use CARES Act dollars for this highway system. We want people to pay for it through fees. I mean, we're going to take those money and we're going to distribute it to small businesses, to people in need in Wyoming. We're not going to, I don't see that as a reasonable alternative. So any discussion on that? I mean, yeah, they can look for fees and various things, and if they give direct appropriations, but I just don't think that we're going to use those dollars for. And even if we did, we wouldn't put it in here and have them apply. We would do that in our special session when we do the review of anything else. So Representative Schwartz.
Question, Mr. Chair, though, the way I read the language, it wouldn't preclude it. I mean, you've deleted the language, but through including any funds available.
Well, they can apply to the state of Wyoming for it.
Right, but it doesn't
If
preclude.
we, I think they're going to have to ask us if we want to give it to them, basically. So all those in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, that motion carries. Now, on page 11, at the end of, after, I have a, this is rough language. So after committee, interim committee, comma, and report all account, no, and report, no, and account and report on all revenues received and deposited in the fund. So we need to know the hard dollars and how much they're collecting each year. And I didn't really spell that out. Okay?
Let's do that again.
After committee, comma, and account and report on all revenues deposited in the new account.
Second for discussion.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 2, line 10, section B basically says the Department of well, it does say the Department of Transportation shall report on the balance in the transportation account and progress on modernization. So I think if you want to report on revenue, that's probably where we ought to put it, and it's already started.
And they, well, and you're right. That just, what we need to do in that paragraph then is add JAC, right? Absolutely.
Transportation and JAC.
So that works, yeah. So we're strike that one, go back to page 2, line 14, is that right? And insert end of joint appropriations.
15 after committee.
Okay, that works.
Mr. Chairman, a friendly amendment to that.
Okay,
And on line 11, after the word balance, and say, and revenue in the revenue received, something to that effect.
that's a friendly amendment. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, that motion carries. Now, and here's the more, these are conceptual amendments. So number one, I want the Department of Transportation to consult with the University of Wyoming and computer science, whoever the appropriate entity there is, to determine and evaluate what it would cost for them to create a system and maintain that system. Because I mean, if you take the blockchain subcommittee and all those folks that are on the avant-garde of computer systems, the way of the future is likely going to be not off the shelf, but more homegrown systems where you write your own code with professionals. And then the University of Wyoming had the possibility of maintaining the professionals and then training them on this machine. If you go to the University of Wyoming and says, we'll give you $80 million to make this system, my guess is they'll do it. And we just need to see if they're capable of doing it, if they're willing to do it, and what those criteria are. So that's one component of it. And we can work with this language really after we.
Is this one motion?
Let's do, like, let me just go through the rest of them. Yeah. And so then I want to make sure we have language, number 2, that ETS reviews the RFP and makes sure that it is sufficiently broad to encompass any alternative in terms of the type of system, whether it's off the shelf, University of Wyoming, or created. So that RFP encompasses the largest gamut of types of systems as possible. So you start wide and then you narrow it down. And so, and by the way, the wide up, you can please comment on these because we'll be drafting this, and then the next day or two we'll be revising the language and we'll get it to you. And then before a final request for proposal, or after request for proposal, but before it goes out to bid, we would like to see what that bid document looks like and have ETS review that document, make sure it's that we're staying on path and staying up to date with where the Department of Transportation is. And once again, our just issue is if this is an $80 million project, we want ETS to be on board each step of the way and consulting with the legislature on where it's going. Okay? So that's the conceptual motion.
Second.
For discussion, go ahead.
So with your insertion of your number one to work with the University of Wyoming, then would that prevent them from extending the RFP out to other private vendors?
Not at all.
So you're saying you want to include the University of Wyoming as well as others in the process?
Well, yeah, I would like them to go out to UW immediately and see what they can do. But when the RFP goes out, it would be written broad enough that it would encompass the University of Wyoming, if that's possible, and report back to us if it is or isn't and why not, basically. So it's a two-step process because they can go to UW right now.
They could go to UW right now. I just think that there's other vendors that are interested in getting
I
a
agree.
proposal, and I'm not so sure that we want to exclude them from that process.
Oh, I'm not. The RFP would be covering everybody. Representative
Chairman?
Swartz, please. Just 1 second.
It just seems to me if we're going to roll ETS into this, we should roll them into it at the beginning with the conversations with UW as well.
I think YDOT already consults with ETS and it's been part of the process. Isn't that right, Taylor?
Mr. Chairman, that would be my comment on that is that I think our intention would be is to have ETS at the table when we have that conversation.
Okay, and so Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, no, I like the idea of broadening this so that it gives the department a chance to think a little bit outside the box. I think it's a good idea.
Okay, any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would your motion be broad enough to anticipate that this could be, or at least tied into a whole enterprise, the state of Wyoming enterprise system, or are you thinking this is just a sort of a silo with the Department of Transportation?
Well, I would defer that to YDOT. My guess is they want to make the system as comprehensive as possible and to be able to be added on if there's a benefit to make it an enterprise system. And they may not. They may want not to do that so that it's proprietary. I just don't know the answer to that.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Go ahead.
We certainly have had those conversations. I don't want to speak for Director Knopp, but absolutely that has been in discussions as to this could be the catalyst for whatever larger system that for citizen information that he would look at. So.
Okay. With that, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And so what will happen is we'll finalize this amendment. We'll get it to you, Don. We'll get it to the YDOT, and we'll try to kick this thing out as fast as we can. And in the meantime, you says this act is effective July 1. Does that mean the fees will go into effect July 1? On page 11, line 8.
Mr. Chairman, that would be my intention, that when it goes into effect, it goes into effect.
So Taylor, are you ready to do that?
Mr. Chairman, we would get all of our tables and fees updated accordingly and get the account set up to start collecting them as of July 1 if this were to pass.
Okay, I just want to make sure that you're comfortable that's what you can do and that's what this language says, because we're game for that. So, okay, with that, we will see this back in a day or two once we get the amendments out. And if you would, Don, if you'll proofread them with me before we throw it back to these guys, just so that we're comfortable.
Mr. Chairman, that's very acceptable to me.
Okay, all right, next.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time.
You bet, thank you.
Good job.
Okay, let's do House Bill 142. Select Committee on Blockchain. We have an amendment for this. This is one of our amendments like we just did. That's what we do here.
Conceptual. Or exceptional.
So who drafted this amendment?
Brilliant.
I know, but who's going to walk us through the damn amendment? That's what I don't know. I know. I mean, I think I've proofread it through. Has everyone else had a chance to read through it? How much time do you want to, do you want to just kick this amendment out? That's what I'm inclined to do. Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, that motion carries. Who's going to carry the bill?
Jared?
That's Jared's bill. And so if Jared has some changes with it, then we'll have him work through it and bring up committee the whole amendment. All right? Any further discussion on the
So,
bill?
Mr. Chairman, what you do is you reduce the appropriation down to 300, and thank you. You reduce the appropriation down to 350. You kind of take the court system out of the whole process. They're included, but not in the way that it was originally. And then you ask for a report back. Is that not it, kind of in a
Has the
nutshell?
auditor seen the amendment? No? You care? No? Good. All right. The courts did show up and said that they kind of just wanted to be referenced, but not have anything to do with it. Other than that, because they just got their brand new system up and running. Okay. All those in favor, as amended, roll call.
Who moved the bill?
I
We
did.
moved the bill 2 or 3 days ago.
No,
Boyd did.
we did.
Second Walters.
We did. Okay. It's hard to keep up with you guys and concepts and things. Representative Kinner,
Aye.
Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Schwartz. Representative Simpson,
Aye.
Representative Stith,
Aye.
Representative Walters,
Aye.
Chairman Nicholas,
Aye.
all ayes.
Okay, we have next, House Bill 132, Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before you members is House Bill 132, the naming of the Casper office building. And really, this is an issue about what I would describe as local control. So when the construction and the funding came through for the Casper State Office Building, it also came through with a task force that was assembled to follow the progress of this building. And so that task force, I'm the co-chairman of it. There is a Senate colleague that's the other co-chair. And we have worked through the design of the building, the exterior finishes, the interior finishes, adding on what was originally just going to be a blank space on the 3rd floor west. It was because of the task force's initiative to go ahead and complete that space. That space will now contain some legislative space, the Chancery Court, and other entities that were not discovered as being in Casper until after we got into the process. Further, the task force has also worked with the local school that's right across the street to mitigate issues that they had. The task force has worked with other affected landowners that surround the building to make sure that those issues were dealt with in a friendly manner. And the task force, when it came to naming it, submitted several names or came together with several names and finally voted on one. And that one name happened to be Mr. John Wold. Subsequently, the State Building Commission felt that they wanted a different name to be selected. And so they chose a different name. And I just felt as though we have taken it away from the locals that have worked on this project for the last 2.5 years. And really for the last 7 or 8 years as we started the whole process and decided that those locals didn't have enough knowledge to know what would be fitting to the fabric of our community. And so Mr. John Wold, he was a geologist. He wasn't born in Wyoming, but as the old saying goes, he got here as quickly as he could. And so what some of his accomplishments, he started out in the oil business down south in Texas, then volunteered for World War II and in the Naval Bureau of Ordnances following Pearl Harbor. He was commissioned to the Bureau of Ordnance and as a minesweeper and a degaussing individual, which is demagnetizing ships. Once he left the military, he moved to Casper, and this is where his Casper connection really began, was in about 1950, 1948. And he started an oil company in Casper. That led him to, as a geologist, his next activity in the 60s and 70s. He's recognized the value of the coal in the Powder River Basin and went into many joint ventures in discovering and developing that coal. During that time, he also started the Trona industry we know in the southwest part of the state, starting with the first Trona mine in that part of the state, or large commercial partnering with others. He then sold that to one of the companies that is still in existence in that area today. He worked on coal underground coal gasification in the Powder River Basin. He's a cattle rancher in Wyoming. All of this while based in Casper. And that was really the task force's whole focus, was who is somebody that is Casper based. And this gentleman was Casper based, lived there for almost 70 years, served in the Wyoming House of Representatives, served in the United States House of Representatives. And it's just kind of a fun fact, at the time of his death, he was the oldest living member of the U.S. House, or past member, as well as the oldest living Eagle Scout in the United States. So just a couple kind of fun facts. Has donated tremendously of his own dollars, but I would also estimate somewhere in the billions is what he paid in royalties throughout the years with all of the discoveries in the mineral industry to the state of Wyoming. But I come back to the fact that he was Casper based and from Casper. The other individual that the State Building Commission selected was Tyra Thompson, certainly a worthy individual. And this is not intended to be a slight at Tyra Thompson. The issue is Tyra Thompson was a Cheyenne native and lived in Cheyenne, and this is a building that's being constructed in Casper. And so I think it fitting that the Casper folks find somebody that fit into the fabric of their community. And it goes to all of our communities. When it's a building in any community, it should be based on folks that have a significant tie. We have a football field named after a former vice president in our community. We have a building named after that former vice president. And we don't see naming around the rest of the state after that former vice president, because that person came from Casper. And we notice that throughout the state, who was significant to those communities. And so that's the purpose of this bill, is really to say, this is who the task force picked. The task force had been tasked, pardon the pun, there with doing so much other activities with this building, and yet we're really overstepped when it came to the decision on the naming of it. And so that's the purpose, a little bit about the individual, and would gladly take any questions at this point.
Questions? Seeing none. Public comment. Please, go ahead. Long time no see.
Richard Garrett, I'm a private citizen. I was born in Casper, Wyoming. I now proudly live in Lander, but I still love Casper. And I'll tell you, I can't think of a better person than John Wald after whom to name this building. That's all I want to say.
Well, appreciate your comments.
So can we ask the member of the SLIB board if she could come and give us a little bit of the discussion on,
How come you get to decide and we don't get to decide? That's what we want.
Is this a bullying thing?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters is a lot bigger than me. No, just kidding. Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, Christy Racine, State Auditor. A couple of comments. I don't think it's clear who gets to name things, but I'm sure that will be fixed shortly. I think that the Wold family is epically qualified and very important to Casper. Might I note that I was born in Casper as well, and started out in Bar None of all places, which is about as humble as you can get being from Casper. I would note over the course of the last year, the State Building Commission did receive a lot of commentary about what the building should be named. And there were two sort of competing forces in that effort. And that was between Tyra Thompson and former Governor Sullivan. Both of which I think are phenomenal candidates, as is Mr. John Wold. It seemed it was at the very, very last minute that Governor Sullivan's name was pulled, and my understanding, which I can't verify, was that there was an additional building that was going to be named after him, so his name was pulled from consideration. But I can tell you all of the communication I received up until just, days before the last meeting where we took a vote was in concern of Secretary of State Thompson and Governor Sullivan. I would note Secretary Thompson was actually the longest serving state elected official in the history of the state, which I thought was an interesting fact.
Well, I don't know if it's fair to have this discussion because we have a great grandson, is that right, in the back? Of Tyra Thompson?
I think we ought to have.
We want him to come up and say what he wants. Come on up there.
Mr. Chairman, just in very quickly, I see it's dark out there, but I believe it's the Kendrick building that's right there and Hathaway right behind it. Down the street behind Representative Larson, I see the Emerson building. I cannot see the Hirschler building, which is now multiplied into the Hirschler buildings because there are two at the north of us, and might finish with saying Happy International Women's Day. Thank you.
So I'm not a fan of naming buildings after people, particularly if they're alive. That's just my personal preference. But committee, any questions?
I'd really like to hear from Secretary of State Thompson's grandson and see. why
A great
he thinks
grandson,
this
isn't
is
it?
important. Come on up here.
You want to say anything?
Sure, come on up. We've heard him orate before. We know he is excellent.
I'd just like to say thank you so much for all the hard work you've been doing for the citizens of Wyoming. I think either candidate would be a phenomenal choice. I know both are very important to Wyoming history. I think whoever you choose will be a great name for the building.
Could we name it after you instead? Come on, we can do it. We can do whatever we want.
Well, Mr. Chairman, that brings tears to my eyes. Right there gives us great faith in the future of this state.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. for
We needed
testifying.
that.
Yeah,
We
that's
like it.
awesome.
We needed that.
Awesome.
You look awful sharp too.
Well, thank you.
He is sharp.
All right. Any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. We have a motion on the bill.
Move the bill.
Moved by Representative
Second.
Larson, seconded by Representative Kinner. Discussion. Representative Schwartz.
I will just note that all of the buildings that were alluded to the best of my knowledge, are named after men. And I think it would be a nice change of pace to name one after a woman.
There you have it.
I think that's an excellent point, although I can guarantee you at some point in time, Tyra Thompson will have a building named after her. Just depends, question of where it's going to be. Amazing one.
As she should.
Yep. Okay. Any other comments? Motion on the bill? Moved and seconded. Question on the bill. Sorry.
Representative Kinner,
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Schwartz,
No.
Representative Simpson,
Aye.
Representative Stith,
Aye.
Representative Walters,
Aye.
Chairman Nicholas.
Aye.
6 ayes, 1 no.
All right. Thanks for coming. We appreciate it. We might have to call you back tomorrow because there's lots of stuff we'd like to do. We'd like your comments. Yeah. Maybe we can make the name of the building time sensitive, so it changes about every 5 years. Back and forth. All right, we have one more bill?
Grand Teton National Park, 164.
Okay, here we go. Representative Schwartz.
Whose is it?
Mr. Chairman and committee, for those of you who are not familiar, there is a park in northwestern Wyoming that is named Grand Teton National Park. If you would like to see it sometime, I would be happy to give you a tour. I'm going to.
May we ask questions while we go? Is it possible to rename the park?
Yeah, it is, thank you, Representative Walters. I'm sure it is possible to rename the park. I'm not sure this is the body that would have that authority. So I'm going to quick go through the bill because I think you all roughly understand what the intent is. But in section 1, first line, it is authorizing the Board of Land Commissioners to sell a parcel known as the Kelly parcel to the United States or a federal agency. And it describes that parcel. B basically says that it shall be a direct sale for cash. Proceeds from that sale will go into the common school account within the permanent land fund. C says this bill will serve as any legislative approval necessary. D says the Board of Land Commissioners may, pursuant to a sale, I have a problem going with my glasses on. Oh, convey the deed. That's what that one is. Only upon the receipt of any funds that have been required. So in other words, they don't get the deed till we get the money. It can be in multiple transactions, that's E. In F, it states that we can accept, they can accept funds, we can accept funds from other entities in lieu of the federal government on behalf of the federal government. Section 2 says the Board of Land Commissioners may explore alternatives for payment, including an exchange, which shall require legislative approval. The authorization in this bill shall expire on December 31st, 2025. It will be effective immediately. I think the bill is pretty straightforward. I think it requires a little explanation. So the theory is that if we pass this bill, the park then will proceed to get an appraisal of the property. And this is part of the controversial issue that has been discussed among other places in this very room. In my conversations with people who are involved in the appraisal and real estate business, let's pick $70 million as a number. It might be higher, it might be lower, but at least it is a number we can work with today. There are those in the legislature who think this parcel might be worth billions and billions of dollars and have stated so from the floor of the House, which is all fine and well. That's a conceptual approach, but the federal government is legally bound, if they're going to buy it, to pay based on an appraised price. The reason I am so in favor of going down this road with an appraised price is basically twofold. And the first side is the relationship of Grand Teton National Park to the tourism industry in Wyoming, our number 2 industry. Teton County for the last 50 years has been pursuing land use planning to enhance the tourism value of that area. And it even goes back farther to when the park was created. A former governor of Wyoming actually was one of the people leading the charge not to let, I can state names in here, can't I? Cliff Hansen didn't want the Rockefellers to do it. And he was one of the ranchers out there with basically guns saying, no way, we're going to allow this. And later in his life, he said that was the biggest mistake he ever made, ever. That having that park created was the best thing that ever happened to Jackson Hole. So now we've got it. What has that impact been? Not only to Jackson Hole, and you can come visit me and I will show you around. And if you're really nice, I might even let you stay in my house. There's a revenue benefit beyond the conceptual, which I'll talk about in a minute. In 2020, the state's share of sales tax revenue was $42 million. The state's share of the lodging tax, which is just starting now, we can guess will be about $11.5 million a year. These are yearly totals. The state share of property tax coming out of Teton County is roughly $89 million for schools already, which includes about $15 million in recapture. At $70 million of an appraisal at 5%, this would be $3.5 million a year, in addition to all those other numbers I'm giving you. All of this goes to the schools. In addition, there is a representative who has proposed an unearned income tax, where I know it's shocking, that would go raise approximately $60 million a year, which would also go to the schools. And 67% of that roughly would come out of residents of Teton County. Why are they in Teton County? To a large extent because of Grand Teton National Park and the efforts the county has made to support that park as a national jewel. Because according to Ken Burns, national parks are America's best idea, and I believe it. I so support national parks, not just in Wyoming, but I try and go to them everywhere I go in this country, and they are America's best idea. So the question is, do we want to sell this parcel to the park or hold out trying to get more money based on some development potential, which I don't ever want to see happen, but a casino on this 640 acres, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think it's in keeping with the area this parcel is located in. A golf course and a few hundred residential units the same. There are other school lands in Teton County we can have that conversation with, but I firmly believe that this could be a legacy purchase for the national park system and the highest and best use of that property. And I really urge you guys to vote aye. And I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Page 3, subsection E at the top of the page, you discuss it may be divided into multiple transactions. And I guess do you intend that in a subdivision way, or I don't fully understand that's intent. If we want to sell the whole parcel, why would you divide it into multiple transactions? I guess would be the question.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, the purpose of that is not to divide it and subdivide it. Is if the appraisal price is more than the federal government has available on October 12th, they can do it in multiple payments. And if that language needs to be clarified, I would be happy to accept a motion to that effect, but that's the purpose of that. Other questions? You have some comments.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We would love to hear.
Liar. No, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Mike Rue, Wyoming State Senate, and proponent on and for the bill. I'm not going to belabor the points. I think Representative Schwartz laid them out quite clearly, but I just wanted to kind of add just a couple. Last year, the previous administration passed the Great Outdoors Act. And that made this money available. So in the previous purchase, if those of you who were here for the Antelope Flats parcel, a massive fundraising effort, national in scope, was undertaken. Donors from all over the country donated millions of dollars over a couple of years to in a Herculean effort to take down that piece of property in the park. This piece now is available through an act of the previous administration, and those dollars are available in total. This would give the people who donate and the people who raise money for such things other opportunities to be able to use their fundraising power to do other things that can help the park. So this is, I think, a good play. And just to amplify what Representative Schwartz said, a lot of people talk about wild speculative values for that property. It's easy to look at an ad on the back of a newspaper on one small piece in a high-end development in another part of our valley, and then overlay that onto a 640-acre piece, multiply it out and say it's worth billions. In this case, that isn't really true. It has a lot of value. It has value as a national park that's incalculable over years, over time. And you don't have to believe me. You just have to look at the rest of the park that's around it and the value, as Representative Schwartz said, that has come to the valley and the state, and see that value grows over time. If we were to sell the property and receive $60, $70 million, as the representative said, Putting that into an account could bring the state investment dollars and investment income in perpetuity, which is kind of the point in a lot of state land deals that we work. And this would be a way that we could generate that money on for, like I say, in perpetuity. So I really think that this is the smart play. It is the best play. It's a legacy play if you're into what the previous administration was trying to do when it passed the Great Outdoors Act and what they were trying to achieve. For all those reasons, I stand on and for the bill and be glad to answer any questions you may have. And if you want to call it the Tyra Thompson piece, I'd go for that too. It is International Women's Day, and she signed my incorporation papers, so I have her signature on file. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, question either for Representative Schwartz or Senator Grew. Do we have some obligation to try to get the highest price for state lands that we sell? And if so, then why wouldn't you amend the bill to say, if we're going to authorize selling it to anyone who wants to buy it, including the federal government if they want to?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, we are, as fiduciaries, responsible for getting funding, the best funding we can for our schools. That's the purpose of school lands. But I don't think you can take that out of the context of what the land is. Currently, we're getting $2,500 a year for that land. Certainly $3.5 million a year would be an improvement on that. The proposition that we should wait and try and find a better offer is fine, but every year we don't get that $3.5 million. If it takes 10 years, we've lost $35 million. Is that the price went up? In some people's wild imaginations, the price went up and we could have gotten 50 million. We don't know that. So at the time, and when you're dealing with the federal government, there are laws. They cannot pay above the unappraised price for, I think, very obvious reasons. It would lead to potential fraud or bribery.
Further questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Mark.
a voice from nowhere. Mr. Chairman, thank you. A question for either the senator or the good representative. So is there a map or something that we can see where this parcel is? I sort of vaguely know where it is, but that would be just one request. And then my thought was similar to Representative Stith's, was to say, well, perhaps we get an appraisal, and then we accept bids on the thing, to make sure that we get the best and highest price from that. Wouldn't you agree, Representative Schwartz?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Kinner, I understand your question completely. I would just say that in my mind, if we can sell it to Grand Teton National Park for whatever the appraised price is, it will create value above and beyond that appraised price that's hard to categorize and quantify. But just in terms of additional sales tax revenues to Teton County, which then come to the state, how do you calculate that? But I think we need to be considering that in the big picture.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just along the same lines, it's just a question of how you calculate value and what is value. It's funny, you just had a discussion about it. Two great citizens of this state talking about naming a building after them. Which one has the greatest value? Can be argued, can be debated. This is the same thing. When you talk about dollars and cents for the greatest value for the school children of Wyoming, I believe is what it says in the Constitution. And I believe that value can be calculated in many different ways. And in this particular case, when you look at the width and breadth of Grand Teton National Park and what it means not only to the state, but the entire nation, I don't think there's any comparison about mere dollars on how you calculate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Wait, so Chairman Harshman. You're here just in time. You're, yeah.
Can I ask a question while he gets that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Schwartz, on page 2, subsection B, it discusses depositing it in the school account. Does that language even need to be in there? Because we have other sections that state that if we sell state lands, school lands, it has to go in that account regardless.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I would say it's redundant language, but it would not be the first redundant language I have seen in state statutes, unless I'm mistaken.
Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the bringer of this bill, and I just tell you, I think we've learned a couple lessons on this deal. The Boyles Hill deal, $5 million, turned it into $500 million in a few years.
Can you get closer to the mic? I can't hear you.
That was a section we sold for $5 million, early 90s. Made Forbes magazine one of the greatest investments of all time, $500 million a few years later. You just think in your lifetimes what's happened to land values here. We sold $40 million in Yellowstone a few years back, Freudenthal administration. I think, you do an appraisal residential value on some of this. I don't think you can sell any of this less than $5 million an acre. I just don't. I think if you're going to amend this bill, there's got to be, we're not going to sell this for $70 million for a whole school section of priceless land.
So my calculation is
on my own across the state.
It's $70 million, that's 110,000 an acre, right?
I just think
I just did the math.
It's not going to get any less valuable. And if we have to hold it for a while, we hold it, but I think we have a constitutional duty. We all raised our right hand and swore, and our duty is those lands, we have a constitutional obligation to put them to the most productive use for the school children. That's it. And, there's that 18-acre parcel, I won't digress, sold a permanent conservation easement on the river for $1.5 million. We can't do that. And boy, I just think this is just pure priceless. Nobody wants to, we all want the same thing. We want to sell it to the people that can print money, but it's got to be the right price. And I just think we have to have some safeguard in there. So,
Mr. Chairman, so Representative Harshman, what amendments, if any, would you propose?
Mr. Chairman, I would put at a minimum, not less than $5 million an acre. And I like 10 million, frankly, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, if the bill says that we can only sell to the federal government, if you put in a high floor, then essentially you're just saying we're not going to sell it. Isn't that right?
Potentially.
Further questions for Chairman Harshman?
And that can be changed as well.
Yeah, I mean, or we're selling it to you.
Mr. Chairman. So this will give me a chance to, so Chairman Harshman, I think there's an interesting conversation on what's the highest and best use of that land for children. You present an argument that says, well, it certainly isn't at $70 million. But then our two Teton County legislators say, well, it certainly isn't $2,500, which is what we're getting now. And so I frankly just don't want to sell the land. I just, once it's gone, it's gone. But having this discussion, if we, how then, as the good senator points out, do you determine the value? And are you saying then you realize that this price is probably higher than the federal government wants to pay now? But if they want it, and if we're going to lose it, it has to be worth more than what they're offering.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's priceless. It's pure gold. And they just passed a 1,900 billion stimulus plan, 1,900 billions.
So follow up, Mr. Chairman. So then could we say at the end of the day, if it's priceless, it's not for sale?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's for sale, but I think it's got to be at the right price.
Okay.
What do you sell pure gold for? Kryptonite, titanium, whatever. I mean,
Well, and when we sold that piece for 40 million acres, what was, there were lots of different discussions, but one of the ideas at the time was, we will trade this property for you for land that has known oil reserves underneath it, so that we will get continuing revenue, and it's something you don't want to develop anyway, but it's okay to develop. So there are lots of all different alternatives. The idea when you just put a sticker number on it, it doesn't compute. And 600, this is $110,000 an acre. You tell me where you can get property in this location for $110,000 an acre. Doesn't exist right now. I mean, you can't buy a condominium for under 800,000. You can't buy a home for under 1.2, 1.3 million in China. And yeah, so what's it worth? And so I think we should determine what the highest and best use is and say if you want the highest price, it's subdivision value and what those developed lots would be. And we know that those lots would sell once developed for easily for $1 million to $3 million, depending on the size, 3 acre, 5 acre plots, on however you developed it. So the question, I don't think we can just presume that the appraisal is going to come in at a number. We have to establish a baseline for that number. We just do, otherwise it's not for sale. And if we don't establish a baseline, then shame on us. So, I mean, that's my thought process on this. So with that, any other public comment?
Mr. Chairman, I've admitted into the room a representative from Office of State Lands. I'm not sure if he wishes to speak, and then we have at least one other person who wishes to offer public comment.
Welcome, State Lands.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman.
Good evening.
We just wanted to note a couple of things, that this Kelly parcel is one of a string of 4 that the state was in negotiations with the Department of Interior to sell to previously. And this is the one that's sort of remains. And I know that there was some frustration with that previously, because I think the federal government didn't have the money at the time. And we just thought we'd give you a little context of how this came to be more recently. And OSLI was approached by the National Park Service back in October of last year, when the service realized, as Senator Garou mentioned, that the Land Water Conservation Fund may actually contain enough money and funding that could be used to purchase the Kelly parcel. Additionally, as part of OSLI's Teton County Development Proposal Study, the service through a letter also expressed interest in working with the state to identify a plan to preserve the values of the Kelly parcel and include it within the park boundary. Just so everybody knows, there have been no promises made to the Park Service. We engaged in a couple of telephone conversations with them, just kind of exploring the opportunity again. They have assured us that if the state is interested, that this time they would be able to move relatively quickly, as opposed to historically where things got bogged down and the money was not quite where everybody thought it was. So we are in very preliminary discussions in the exploration phase. And as noted, the board is required to sell state trust lands at public auction. In the event that the board would desire to pursue this opportunity, they would require authorization of the legislature to sell the Kelly parcel outside of the public auction process. So that's kind of what this bill is designed to do. And I have Deputy Jason Crowder here with me. He's been on most of the telephone calls with the Park Service, and I'm not sure if he has anything else to add about those discussions, but thought we'd just give you a little color on what we've been up to related to this bill. Jason.
Thanks, Director. Mr. Chairman, I don't have much more to add about the process. I think the Director characterized that appropriately. Very preliminary conversations, and it's somewhat an appearance of motivation on the Park Service part to move forward. So that's why we've started some of the administrative early procedures to move forward. What I might give the committee is just a little bit more detail about the parcel itself. It sits in a very picturesque part of Teton County. It has a great view of the Tetons and the whole valley, and it leads into the Grovant Wilderness. It's just a great place to go and visit and just experience. One of the things that is interesting in our files is that we have a roadway easement, obviously, to the Forest Service for the road that goes through the parcel and into the Forest Service. But what also came with that road is a scenic easement, which has stopped us and hindered us from doing a lot of development studies. That easement is 1,000 feet wide. It's 500 feet off of the center line of the highway. And what it says inside of our files is that no development can occur within that scenic easement. And through research and through effort, we can't even build a road through that area. So development of the parcel is largely hindered by that scenic easement. Just to get outside of it, you can't get an access road through that easement to subdivide otherwise. So that stopped a lot of our conversations about it. That doesn't mean that the parcel is not accessible. Obviously, the federal government has a process whereby you can petition an easement through them, and we could secure access through there, but it would be after a NEPA process, an environmental assessment process to do that. And we're not sure, we haven't started that. We're not sure how long that would take. But I just wanted to remind the committee, I know a lot of you already have a lot of experience with this parcel, but that scenic easement is there, and it's a hindrance to existing development operations and maybe a hindrance to overall valuation and appraisal process.
So I'm not sure I understand the easement. Is the easement, so is the parcel landlocked?
Mr. Chairman, it's not landlocked. It's accessed by the Grovant Road.
So the scenic easement runs along the western boundary or northern boundary?
The scenic easement goes along the roadway. It's 500 feet on either side of the center line of that road for a total of 1,000.
So it's only along the road. It has nothing to do with the parcel.
The parcel, Mr. Chairman, the parcel runs through, the road runs through the southern end of the parcel.
Runs through, okay.
Yeah.
And so
Mr. Chairman,
what is the acreage contained in the easement?
Mr. Chairman, I knew you were going to ask that question and I couldn't do those calculations fast enough, but I can get that for you.
So, I mean, well, do you have a calculation of what the developmentable property is?
Mr. Chairman, we can get those numbers for you. I want to say we had in the previous process through the previous agreement that the director mentioned with Teton County, we had the number of about 30 to 35 possible lots that could be developed outside of the easement. And those were anywhere from 10 to 30 acre lots. And again, if you'd allow me to do those calculations, I can provide those numbers to you.
Okay, further questions from Jason? All right, thank you. Appreciate the information. That helps. Further discussion, further public comment.
Mr. Chairman, I've just admitted one person to offer public comment.
Okay, do we have a name? Hello, Ms. Mortimer, is that right? You're muted.
Sorry about that. Hello, good evening. Hello, Chairman and representatives. Thank you for allowing me to make a statement on behalf of the Nature Conservancy of Wyoming. I certainly, and my colleagues certainly understand and appreciate the need for the state of Wyoming to make decisions with state lands to help fund education. You know, we understand these lands are to be managed or sold to help support education in the state of Wyoming. But as been mentioned already, the importance of national parks are really critical to sustaining Wyoming's tourism economy. And the Nature Conservancy views the Kelly parcel as a continuation of the efforts that we and many other stakeholders, as well as the state of Wyoming, made to see Antelope Flats parcel made part of Grand Teton National Park. So with that, we've constantly advocated for land water conservation funding at the national level to support, basically support these purchases. so that the state can be appropriately compensated and Grand Teton National Park is kept whole. The sale of the Kelly parcel will ensure future economic benefit of the state through tourism and recreation, which has been mentioned already, but it will also sustain educational funding. So we really believe that allowing the sale of the Kelly parcel is good for Wyoming. It's good for Wyoming students. It's good for tourism. And the most important piece for us in our mission is that it's excellent for the wildlife and the habitat preservation. So while I understand the opportunity for us to get a highest price in terms of financial needs, I would just say that there's also a legacy piece here that we want to leave for our children and our grandchildren in terms of keeping that landscape intact and ensuring that the great wildlife that we have there is free to roam. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Representative Stitt.
Mr. Chairman, for Ms. Mortimer, Yellowstone National Park has about 3,471 square miles. Grand Teton National Park has about 485 square miles. This section is 1 square mile. So in what way would adding 1 square mile onto 3,956 square miles materially or substantially add to tourism or economic development in Teton County?
Well, thank you. It makes a lot of sense because it looks like it's just a postage stamp. But if we allow things like this for development, I think it still does have impacts on wildlife, even if it's a small amount. And on top of that, I just think that the state of Wyoming has a great opportunity to show how we preserve these national treasures. And so if we the state are responsible for what I would call inappropriate development in those areas, then it's a bit of a mark on the amazing work that this state does around ungulate migration and in preserving scenic vistas.
Okay, further questions? All right, we appreciate your testimony. Any other public comment?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just admitted Sharon Mader.
Okay. Just come up and get ready. Sharon, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to present comments tonight, and thank you, Chairman and committee members. My name is Sharon Mader. I'm the Grand Teton Program Manager for the National Parks Conservation Association, long-term resident of Wyoming, and I have had 2 small children who are now young adults who have gone through our school system, and I would say that it is one of the best in the country, and I personally would like to keep it that way and feel that this project being proposed is a way to do that. The 640-acre Kelly State Land section does lie on the boundary of Grand Teton National Park. It has been managed essentially as part of the park for many years, providing very little revenue to the state of Wyoming. Yet it is an extremely important portion of our valley. I'm a long-term resident of Jackson Hole, and a very important corridor for wildlife as our state and our community talks about the value of our migrating ungulates. This is one of the most important sections in the state. Additionally, this parcel is an important part of the park landscape. As Haley had said, it's an important part of our tourism sector. We had record numbers of people coming here last year during COVID. And as a park advocate, we anticipate that those numbers will rise significantly this year. My first job ever was a park ranger in Grand Teton National Park, so I can attest firsthand how passionately people connect with our national parks and how that leads to a love of our state, investment in our state, development and moving to our state. So some of those aspects are positive, others are not so positive, but it is the parks that really represent our state in the minds of people around the country and around the world. I can't underestimate, or we can't underestimate the importance of this Great American Outdoors Act passage. My organization has worked on this for decades to help to bring money to the Park Service and other agencies to fund deferred maintenance and structures that are in disrepair. As part of that, important funding came to the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which has had inadequate funding for as long as the fund has existed. This work on behalf of so many people and organizations will bring an incredible opportunity to Wyoming to purchase this property. It's something that many of us, myself included, have worked on for nearly a decade to accomplish. So I hope that you will open your minds in terms of this opportunity in the FY22 budget to have this appear on the president's budget and be funded and purchased this year. It's an amazing opportunity, and I don't think it's one that should be passed by. Our state's current budget shortfall is dire, and it has led to significant cuts in educational funding, and it's created an urgent need in this committee and across the legislature to find new sources of revenue. This is a new source of revenue. We commend the state of Wyoming. I know many of you have been participated in these conversations for many years. I commend you all for your tenacity and resolve that resulted in the sale of the 2 previous parcels. Those efforts brought in $62 million to the state, and this parcel will bring in even more. This is the last of a legacy project to protect parks as part of our national parks. Grand Teton, Yellowstone are iconic attractions and an iconic part of what our state is. I encourage the committee to vote in favor of this bill, and I believe that this action will represent a real win for Wyoming and for the millions of visitors who come to our state each year. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you for your testimony. We appreciate it. Any other public comment? Oh, yeah. Richard, fire away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's nice to be back. Richard Garrett, and I'm speaking as a private citizen, although I will say this is like deja vu all over again. A similar bill passed through the legislature a few years ago, and it resulted in the successful sale of the Antelope Flats parcel, similarly sized. And I will say private funding stepped up and closed half of that gap. So perhaps there's an opportunity for that as well. You know, I think I really like the idea of this thing never being sold, actually, that it just stay there, that it produce $2,500 a year for the state, and that it be seen by people passing by as a natural part of the national park, even though it's owned by the state of Wyoming. Unfortunately, I don't think that that's going to happen. You know, there's going to be pressure. There always is. Change is inevitable. You know that. I mean, that is something that you all deal with every single day. Sitting here as we are and in this beautiful room, in this beautiful Capitol, that you all had the courage, the boldness, and the vision to restore on behalf of the people of the state of Wyoming, and not just those of us that are here in this room or in the state right now, alive and thriving, but for all of the generations to come, is to me very similar to the opportunity that you have right now with this parcel. What are you going to do for future generations? It's a tough one. I don't really know that there's an absolute right answer. It's a willing buyer and willing seller. I said earlier that I live in Lander. I'm about to move to Cheyenne. It's been very hard to find property in this beautiful town, but we did close on one and probably paid a little bit more than we would have wanted to pay. But we did so because we believe in the future of our state and we believe in the future of Cheyenne, and my employer made me do it. So I'm excited to move down here. We've just got to find that willing buyer. We've got to have that baseline price. I think that Chairman Nicholas said it very well. Maybe it is 70 million. Maybe it's 44 million. That's about what Antelope Flats went for. I don't know. Real estate deals are always tough. They're very tough to negotiate in this kind of atmosphere. So again, I respect the dilemma that you face, but we've got to have that boldness. And you've got to fulfill your fiduciary obligation. That 3.5 million annually that Representative Schwartz referred to is really important for our school kids. Everybody in this room knows that. So as the bill is written right now, I stand in favor of it. I think the flexibility that it offers is good for the state. Let's let the Office of State Lands do their job, and let's see what the federal government is willing to step up and do. So with that, I'll answer any questions.
Thanks. Any questions for Rich? Okay. Any other public comment? Close public comment. We have a motion on the bill. Moved by Representative Walters, seconded by Representative Schwartz. Discussion on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It hasn't been said yet.
I'm only want to make one more comment. I think I've said almost everything I wanted to say. But the way I look at it, putting value on a piece of property, I understand fiduciary responsibility. But when generations of school kids in Wyoming can go to Jackson Hole and look at that school section and go, yeah, maybe we could have maximized our return on this by developing it. But we had the foresight to say, no, this particular parcel, the highest and best use of it is to make a part of Grand Teton National Park and preserve it for generations and generations of not just people who come to visit, but for all the wildlife that takes advantage of it. I think the children will say it was a good idea and they think we did the right thing. Thank you.
Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, committee, you know, I'm struggling, and I think a little bit because of the district that I come in. Several years ago, there is a real effort that I signed on to look at the possibility of transferring the federal lands to the state. And for a lot of the same conversation we're having here tonight, it was to enhance revenue, it would serve as a better benefit to the state of Wyoming, and we thought that we could do it better, and we had some studies, and the studies showed that it would be a difficult thing. More importantly for me, I supported that, but my district said, not just all of my district says we don't want you to do that, and so I've heard that loud and clear, and I won't vote on another one of those bills, although I still, you know, I respect what my constituents said. But yet now we want to, this just seems kind of the same thing. We want to sell this land, same argument, but in reverse, sell it to the federal government. And then we don't have it. So it's kind of this reverse argument that I had. And so, you know, but now there's this impassioned argument that it's the right thing to do. And I'm just, you know, now I guess maybe I'm feeling how some of my constituents felt when we thought we was going to transfer public lands from the federal government to the state. I'm feeling that impassioned that I just don't know that I want to get rid of it. I just kind of a conundrum that I'm in. I guess I'm just, it would really have to be worth it, but I'm not in favor of it.
So I have a proposed amendment. And so if you go to line 23 on page 3, bottom of the line, add a sentence that said any cash sale shall be no less than 500,000 per acre. Per acre. And so that means if this property was sold, it would raise roughly $320 million. I think that's a bargain for the state parks. And I don't know if it's the right number, but why would we get rid of it? Because I can tell you in 50 years or 100 years, it's going to be worth a lot more than that. And if we don't do that, then we ought to exchange it for land that will bring that type of revenue to the state on those other paragraphs for it. So we have a second on the motion. Moved and seconded, discussion. Representative Stiff.
Just a question, the number 500,000, I mean, I get it. I think the land's worth a lot more than 110,000 an acre. Why 500 as opposed to some other number?
I don't know, just that's what my gut tells me. Actually, my answer is that amount of money would have a reasonable long-term impact on our school permanent lands funds. So the common schools count, it would make a difference. Say we had 5% per year on that, what does that turn into? Yeah, a year. So 30 million a biennium. That'd be 1/10 of our problem. Representative Schwartz.
Is that 500,000 an acre or developable acres?
Per acre.
Question.
All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that motion carries. Okay, back on the bill. Any further discussion? Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion for an amendment, and it would be on page 1, line 11, after the word authorized, to add and directed on line 12, to after cell 2, delete the United States or a federal agency and replace with to the highest qualified bidder. And then essentially on page 2, make conforming changes, which would include on page 2, line 17, after the phrase deliver to the delete Department of the Interior in a form reasonably acceptable to the department and replace with the highest qualified bidder. Page 2, line 21, after funds, put a period and delete the balance of that line and the rest. And on page 3, delete lines 8 through 23. So
There's a second. Fails for a second.
the idea is that if we're going to carry out our constitutional obligation to maximize value for our schools, let's mean it, as opposed to some phony sale where it's not for market value. And so that's the purpose of this. If we're going to sell it, let's sell it.
But it failed for lack of a second, so that motion dies. We're back on the bill. Okay, roll call on the bill.
So it is still a do pass as amended. Representative Kinner.
No.
Representative Larson. No. Representative Schwartz. Aye. Representative Simpson.
Aye.
Representative Stith.
You can amend them on the floor.
Aye.
Ooh, that was painful. Representative Walters. Chairman Nicholas.
Aye.
5 ayes, 2 noes.
Okay, committee, we have to be back here in just over 12 hours.
What do we have in the morning, Mr. Chairman?
We've got about 5 bills on the table. So we'll see how many we can get through because we need to prepare a little bit for the remainder of the budget. So we'll probably adjourn at around 9:30 just so we can all get comfy.
Mary Lee, where are we at in the morning?